Hi everyone, this is part 2 of a series of videos I'm doing on the Enlightenment period and the Reformation and how we got to this point with our Western Christian societies. In the description in the last video, I was talking about the water of the dragon. And in Revelation 12, verse 15, it says, "And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which kept the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." Now that remnant has remained in the people of the Western culture, and if we know anything about history, we can see that this dragon has pursued the woman or the remnant of Israel amongst these people and has cast out of its mouth this water, this false doctrine, this other Christ. In the beginning of Revelation 2, verse 9, "I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan." So, if we translate Satan, that's the synagogue of the adversary. They're the adversary of the church. Revelation 2, verse 2, "I know thy works and thy labor and thy patience, and how thou canst not bear them which are evil. And thou hadst tried them which say they are apostles and are not, and hast found them liars, and has borne and haste patience, and for my name's sake has labored and has not fainted." Now in Matthew 24, verse 24, Jesus says, "For there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that if it were possible they shall deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before." We can see that there's a false Christ, there's a false Christianity, and this is the water of the dragon that deceives the saints. So in this series, I'm going to explore how this dragon manifested in the early Roman Catholic Church, in early Christianity, and how it again reared its head and I believe was unchained in the time of the Reformation and the Enlightenment period. So all of these philosophers keep coming together and back to the same opinions. Marx's defense of Jewish emancipation and critique of the Jewish question. The Jew must cease to be a Jew if he will not allow himself to be hindered by his law from fulfilling his duties to the state and his fellow citizens. And this was from Bruno Bauer. The Jews, like the Christians, are fully politically emancipated in various states. Both Jews and Christians are far from being humanly emancipated. Hence, there must be a difference between political and human emancipation. Marx and Engels, the Holy Family. Capitalism has not only doomed the social function of the Jews, it has also doomed the Jews themselves. Abraham Leon towards a solution to the Jewish question. Within the 18th century Enlightenment, the perspectives of Jewish emancipation and the Jewish question were synthesized to the extent that emancipation was justified in terms of solving the Jewish question. Within the French Revolution, the inclusive face of universalism that was articulated in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen was synthesized with the terror directed at those labeled enemies of humanity. In both the Enlightenment and the revolutionary tradition, however, there were alternative ways of thinking about Jewish emancipation that sought to break radically from the prejudicial assumption of the Jewish question. In the 19th century, the synthesis of Jewish emancipation and Jewish question was to be torn apart. On the one hand, the Jewish question was set in opposition to Jewish emancipation. On the other hand, Jewish emancipation was justified independently of the Jewish question. The tensions contained in the 18th century synthesis could no longer be held in check. So it seems to be Jewish emancipation was the question of all these people. So this was obviously a big problem for these Jews and Jewish bankers, and why these people were set in place as pseudo-Christians to change people's opinion on the problem with Jews. And the problem with Jews was usury and banking, and we all know that, and also blood libel. So you have to ask yourself why. Why did practically all of Europe ban Jews from their country? I mean, I believe that the Netherlands and Amsterdam were one of the few that allowed them in, and we know that Amsterdam had a morality problem, or has a morality problem now. It says the history of the Jews in Europe span a period of over 2,000 years. Some Jews, a Judean tribe from the Levant, as the Romans called Israel Judea, they're definitely a tribe from there, migrated to Europe just before the rise of the Roman Empire in 27 BC. Although Alexandrian Jews had already migrated to Rome, a notable early event in the history of Jews in the Roman Empire was 63 BC siege of Jerusalem. Now, they were even kicked out of Rome at one point. So I just want to know why do these people who are supposedly peaceful and, quiet, keep to themselves, why does everyone want to kick them out? If we look at the mainstream opinion, it says religious attitudes were reflected in the economic, social, and political life of medieval Europe. In much of Europe during the Middle Ages, Jews were denied citizenship and rights, barred from holding posts in government and military, and excluded from membership in guilds and professions. Is this just because European people were, pretty tight-knit because they were related, or it's a ethnic thing? To be sure, some European rulers and societies, particularly during the Middle Ages, afforded Jews a degree of tolerance and acceptance, and it would be an error to conceive of Jews as facing an unchanging and unceasing manifestation of anti-Jewish oppression during this period in 1096. However, Knights of the First Crusade unleashed a wave of anti-Semitic violence in France and the Holy Roman Empire, including massacres of Worms, Trier, and Metz. It says here, unfounded accusations of ritual murder and of host desecration and the blood libel allegations of Jews' sacrifice of Christian children at Passover to obtain blood from unleavened bread appear in the 12th century. The most famous example of these accusations that the murder of William of Norwich occurred in England, but these accusations were revived sporadically in Eastern and Central Europe throughout the medieval and modern periods. Now, this stuff seems to be resurfacing again today. It can't be a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that today in these elitist groups that we know are related to these people, we've got murmurings of human trafficking and children being used for their blood and ritual sacrifice. We've seen the Bohemian Grove pictures. We know that all these elitists go to these places and pretend to sacrifice children. Another reason why they became banned from Europe, as European commerce grew in the Middle Ages, some Jews became prominent in trade, banking, and money lending. And Jews' economic and cultural success tended to arouse the envy of the populace. I'm sure it did, boo-hoo, everyone's upset because they've got economic success. No, it's because they're charging people usury and dominating the economy of entire countries. This economic resentment, allied with traditional religious prejudice, prompted the forced expulsion of Jews from several countries and regions, including England, France, Germany, Portugal, Provence, and Papal States. They're destroying economies. And as this philosopher said here, capitalism is a threat to Jews. I mean, why is that? How can it be a threat to Jews? Is that because it makes the people in those countries wealthy? Is it because it gives them power over the Jew in their own countries, in their own economies, with their own people? It's a threat to Jews because they can't be involved in the capitalism because of the rules of the country. And we see here that economic resentment is arising with the Jew in, the early millennium, around the medieval period. Jewish emancipation was the process in various nations in Europe of eliminating Jewish disabilities, e.g., Jewish quotas to which European Jews were then subject, and the recognition of Jews as entitled to equality and citizenship rights. It included efforts with the community to integrate into their societies as citizens. It occurred gradually between the late 18th century and the 20th century. So all of these restrictions were put on Jews previously because, number one, they were kicked out of people's country for destroying their economies through usury. They were kicked out of England. They were kicked out of Europe, many countries in Europe. And the whole Enlightenment movement seems to be about removing those restrictions on Jews to destroy the Western civilization through their obviously Marxist and socialist agendas. Jewish emancipation followed the Age of Enlightenment and concurrent Haskalah or Jewish Enlightenment. Various nations repeated to supersede previous discriminatory laws applied specifically against Jews where they reside. Before the emancipation, most Jews were isolated in residential areas for the rest of the society. Emancipation was a major goal of European Jews of that time who worked within their communities to achieve integration in the majority societies and broader education. Many became active politically and culturally within wider European civil society as Jews gained full citizenship. They emigrated to countries offering better social economic opportunities such as the United Kingdom and the Americas. Some European Jews turned to socialism, Zionism, or both. And I just want to add here that before emancipation, they also converted to Catholicism or Protestantism and integrated into these systems too. Although outwardly converting, inwardly they still remained to follow their own religion and ethnic rules. Now, some people might say, what is the problem with that? You know, that's their right and entitlement to follow and believe these things. And yes, that would be true, but do it in your own country or in your own society. Why integrate into other people's countries and societies and use them and then try to change their rules and their culture? But not only that, their own religious literature states that they have to get rid of this Christian culture, Christian society, because it is against their tikkun olam. So all of these philosophers, starting with Hegel, were all about destroying Western culture to emancipate the Jews. And as that article I just read said, that basically since the French and American revolutions and since this time of enlightenment, Western culture's been pretty much dead, and it's a gradual downhill to socialism and Marxism, which is Jewish. In the 1820s, the emergent opposition between Jewish emancipation and the Jewish question may be illustrated through the debate between the older and allegedly more conservative Hegel. So it's all started with Hegel from this particular university, and the radical German popularist and student radical Jacob Fries. In the pamphlet titled On the Danger Proposed to the Welfare and Character of the German People by the Jews, Fries maintained that harm caused by Jews was such that they should be prohibited from establishing their own educational institutions, marrying Gentiles, employing Christians as servants, or entering Germany, that they should be forced to wear distinctive mark on their clothing, and that they should be encouraged to emigrate. Fries' depiction of the Jews as the enemy of the people was coupled with the revolutionary conviction that all political life must derive exclusively from the people, a category from which the Jews were excluded. Now, don't forget that, Hegel has brought about this Hegelian dialectic, playing both sides. So just because somebody speaks in opposition to what these people were doing, at this time they're creating these philosophical debates, playing both sides so that they get the synthesis out of what they want. Hegel argued that the superficial attraction of Fries' radical populism was the mix of heart, friendship, and enthusiasm on which it is based. But he maintained that the hatred and contempt Fries showed for rights, law, and the state was the chief shibboleth whereby false friends of the people give themselves away. Hegel demonstrated that it is a matter of infinite importance that a human being counts as such because he is a human being, not because he is a Jew, Catholic, Protestant, German, Italian, etc. And this all makes sense if you are a person who follows the two laws of Jesus, which is to love God with your whole heart and to love your brother as you do yourself. However, it only works if the other person has the same philosophy, which these people did not. And that when we speak of Jews as human beings, this is not just a neutral and abstract quality. For the consequence is that the granting of civil rights gives those who receive them a self-awareness, a recognized legal person in civil society. Hegel reputed those who sought to deny civil and political rights to Jews on the pretext that Jews were a foreign nation and not an integral part of the people. If they had not been granted civil rights, the Jews would have remained in the isolation with which they had been reproached, and this would rightly have brought blame and reproach upon the state which excluded them, which obviously now has completely turned on its head because, you know, as I said, my grandfather grew up in First World War Germany, and he said during this time, none of these Jewish business owners would employ German people. We know that in business, that is in politics, in education, in media, we have Jewish nepotism. So for a small group, minority people, they hold the most gatekeeper jobs. And if you don't bend over and basically do as you're told, then you don't get involved in these kind of areas of society and you don't make money. You are economically punished for not doing as you're told. We even have the honeypot system, like Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, directly linked to Mossad, who basically honeypot politicians and businessmen and people who are affluent so that they are forced into doing as they're told or have their entire lives destroyed. Now, see how this is very manipulative in what Hegel's saying, because it's not about human rights. And this is where this Enlightenment human right thing is coming from, human beings. You have this innate right as a human. And this is not biblical because, in my opinion, the Bible has God's rights. There's only one law of the universe, and that's God's law. And it doesn't matter who you are. If you break God's laws, then you should be punished in that sense. If the Jews who were emancipated in the first place because they were charging usury and destroying people's lives and the economy through their merchant banking and their Babylonian mystery beliefs, they should have been punished accordingly because they're breaking God's laws. And you don't have rights based on being human to be corrupt just because you're human. There's a reason why they had restrictions on them in the first place, and that is because they were causing harm to people through their belief system. So as a Western nation, as a Christian nation, it's rightful to judge everyone according to God's rules. And God's rule is you don't charge usury. This is not a race thing or a national identity thing. This is just God's rights for all. God hates unjust weights. Hegel's robust repudiation of Frei's false radicalism was, as it were, the first salvo of a struggle resumed 20 years later in the 1840s in a debate between the radical young Hegelian Bruno Bauer. So, you know, we've got Hegel, who's got a Bauer in his family. Bruno Bauer is a student of Hegel, and he's also the teacher of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Over the Jewish question in Germany, paradoxically, it was the spirit of the conservative Hegel that Marx disdained himself from, the radical young Hegelian. It is to this debate we now turn. So, you know, it's all Marxism. This is just brewing in this philosophy in Germany up to the First and Second World War, all these supposed, inverted commas, grassroots philosophers and radicalists. They all supposedly come from these, you know, average families with average backgrounds. They're all very well educated politically. They all know what to say exactly. All of their backgrounds seem to be whitewashed. They're all Protestant church people. They're all in the priesthood of the Protestant church, or their families were, their fathers were. This doesn't mean anything that their background says they're either German or Protestant, because we look at the Jesuit order and we know for a fact that these people are from the Jewish background and they are in the Catholic Church pretending to be Christian. Our alternative media today is no different. We have these people that seem just to be average people from grassroots origins, but we can't trust a lot of these new age alternative media people because they could very well be backed by these Rothschild families, and as it appears with these same people, there's a really big agenda here going on, and that is that these Jewish people have freedom to do whatever they want in Western society and remove these rules that have been placed on them because they were destroying Western society. I honestly think that when they receive the freedom to do whatever they want within the Western European people's nations, this is when the little season of Satan began. This is when the dragon was unchained. And it was unchained against the people of Israel. It was unchained against the lost tribes of Israel who were among the European people. So it's really interesting that it's all starting here with Hegel and this University of Tubingen, or Tubingen, I don't know how that's pronounced. But it comes down today to the fact that we've got this mRNA technology coming out of this very university in leagues with all these pharmaceutical companies for the COVID-19 vaccine, BioNTech, Moderna, and CureVac. Who's behind this? So we've got someone funding this university, someone funding a massive political movement back in the 18th and 19th centuries, probably a bit earlier. They want freedoms to charge usury and have absolute control of banking. And when we connect the dots, we end up with three parties or groups of people that always seem to be behind these agendas. And that is, number one, the Vatican. Number two, the Jesuits, who come from the Vatican. Number three, the Jews, who are the bankers for the Vatican. So I can only speculate that these three groups are all linked to the dragon and are all controlled by the dragon, who I believe I've shown in my other videos to be the Chaldean priesthood who come from Babylon originally. I mean, this is really big stuff. And now, because of this COVID-19 situation, we're now having the banking system change again, and what looks like digital identities with our banks and a digital currency, and the crush of the dollar as we know it. And that's the dollar in every country, not just the US dollar. It's the use of physical money. So for a German philosopher who is Hegel, is always touted as a German philosopher, he's got a lot of opinions on Jews and changing their situation. He appears to be a Kabbalist, and we look at his mother, Maria Magdalena Fromm, and Fromm is a Jewish surname. I've pointed this out in another video before, the one on Bruno Bauer, if you go back and have a look at that. But there's a lot of people called Fromm, and hey, hello, in her history, she's got Regina Magdalena Bauer, Elizabeth Kepler, that's going to come up again later, so Kepler with this university. So was Hegel a Jew? Well, it's pretty deceptive if he's pretending to be a German and saying that he's not, when he has a mother who has a Jewish surname, and she's got this Bauer family back in his mother's line. Kinsel, this reminds me of Kinsey. We know about Kinsey, don't we, in his perverted philosophies. So we look at Hegel's upbringing. His father, George Ludwig, born in Tubingen, was secretary of the Revenue Office. So he was in finance with politics, and at the court of Karl Eugen, Duke of Württemberg. And I think he comes up also related to this school. Hegel's mother, Maria Magdalena Louise Hegel née Fromm, came from a wealthy family in Stuttgart. And as I showed at the beginning, via Hegel's father's line as well as his mother's line, they were families that intermarried. They were both from the Bauer line. So Maria Magdalena Louise from Fromm was the daughter of a lawyer and a High Court of Justice at Württemberg Court. So no small fry. 100 notable alumni of University of Tubingen. Number 1 is George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Johannes Kepler. So we just saw in Hegel's genealogy, he has Keplers in his family. Was a German astronomer, mathematician, astrologer, natural philosopher, and writer of music. He is a key figure in the 17th century scientific revolution, best known for its laws of planetary motion and his books Astronomer Nova. So, did he get his knowledge from these Chaldean priesthood? Maybe he's not German, as they say here. Maybe he's from these Chaldean families. So here in this Oxford academic article, 3, of God and his community, Kepler and the Catholic Church. This chapter considers Kepler's relationship with both specific Catholics and with the larger Catholic Church via an exploration of the theme of theological accommodation. It begins with Kepler's correspondence with Herwart von Hohenberg, in which Kepler portrayed astrology itself as a kind of divine accommodation. So, this kind of sounds like the astrological religion. It then moves to Kepler's correspondence with Jesuit Paul Gulden, in which Kepler argued that he should be allowed to participate in Mass in a Catholic church, with his particular theological objections duly noted. Finally, it considers Kepler's larger attitude to the Jesuit order and to Jesuit science in particular. So Paul Gulden was a Swiss Jesuit mathematician and astronomer. He discovered the Gulden theorem and determined the surface and volume of a solid of revolution. The theorem was also known as Pappus Guldenus theorem and Pappus centroid theorem, attributed to Pappus of Alexandria. Gulden was noted for his association with the German mathematician and astronomer Johannes Kepler. Gulden composed a critique of Cavalieri's method of indivisibles. It says, although of Jewish descent, his parents were Protestants and they brought Gulden up in the faith. Yeah, right, they did. He was a professor of mathematics in Graz and Vienna. So I've got to ask the question, if his parents were Protestants, why was he a Jesuit priest? Why was he a Jesuit mathematician for the Catholic Church? And if they brought him up in the faith, you got to ask the question, why is Kepler surrounded by all these Jewish Jesuit mathematicians and family, and yet it doesn't say in his own personal history, it seems to be whitewashed that he was actually probably Jewish himself. So in this book, it's called The Pursuit of Harmony, Kepler on Cosmos, Confession and Community by Aviva Rothman. It says in this chapter 1, the study of divine things, Kepler as astronomer priest. Just an overview of the chapter. It says this chapter considers Kepler's early conception of the relationship between his mathematical and astronomical work and his confessional identity. It explores Kepler's theological metaphysics, which link God, man, and nature via the idea of geometry. Now, I don't know about you, but when I think of this, I think of the Metatron. It says Kepler applied this metaphysics to contemporary debates about the nature of Christ's presence in the Eucharist, and argued much as the Calvinists did that the Lutheran notion of ubiquity was rationally incomprehensible. He hoped to use his first book, The Mysterium Cosmographicum, to help resolve Eucharistic disputes. So we can see that the Metatron's cube is related to the Sephirot and the Tree of Life with Kabbalah. Archangel Metatron's cube in sacred geometry. In sacred geometry, Archangel Metatron, the angel of life, oversees the flow of energy in a mystical cube known as Metatron's cube, which contains all the geometric shapes in God's creation and represents the patterns that make up everything God has made. These duties tie in with Metatron's work overseeing the tree of life in Kabbalah, where Metatron sends creative energy down from the top, the crown of the tree, towards all the parts of creation. So it says Metatron's cube contains every shape that exists in the universe God has created. So here we've got this sacred geometry that Kepler is talking about. In her book Metatron, Invoking the Angel of God's Presence, Rose van den Enden writes that studying sacred geometry leads one to an understanding of how Creator has structured the physical world around us. Within this plane, certain patterns emerge that point to its unity and connection to a divine mind that created it. Timeless geometric codes underline seemingly desperate things, showing the parallels between patterns in snowflakes, shells, flowers, the corneas of our eyes, the DNA molecule that is the building block of human life, and the galaxy itself in which Earth resides. So from the Theosophical Society, so basically Helena Blavatsky's Theosophy, it's got the strange identity of Jesus Christ. And it says the New Testament may be the most widely read book in the world, and as everyone knows, the New Testament is about Jesus Christ. You would think then that people would know that the New Testament says about Jesus. As it turns out, a great deal of what they know is wrong. Most people think it says that he was God, really. It says here, as the New Testament scholar Bart B. Ehrman puts it, Jesus was thought of as an angel, or an angel-like being, or even the angel of the Lord. In any event, a superhuman divine being who existed before his birth and became human for the salvation of the human race. This, in a nutshell, is the incarnation Christology of several New Testament authors. Ehrman, chapter 7. We might also be able to say which angel they thought Jesus was. Quest readers may remember the earlier article of mine, God and the Great Angel. In it, I argue that by some theories there were originally two gods in Israel, El, the high God, and Yahweh, God of Israel alone, sometimes known as the angel of the Lord. So where have we seen this before? We've seen this with the Marcionites, saying that there was a good God that Jesus belonged to and an evil God that the Old Testament was based on. Eventually, however, the Jews decided that Yahweh was not an angel, he was the high God himself. El and Yahweh were the same. This transition had probably been made by the 6th century BC. But the great angel did not go away. He continued to survive in Judaism for centuries afterward. He was sometimes known as the Son of Man. The first usage of the Son of Man in this sense appears in the book of Daniel from the 2nd century BC. I saw in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Daniel 7:13. Sometimes the Son of Man was called Metatron, a name that looks more Greek than Hebrew. That may be because it is. One theory, there are many, says this name comes from the Greek meta, tal thronu, the angel with the throne of God. I don't know, but maybe Metatron is a Greek name for Melchizedek and not this particular angel they're talking about. Metatron the angel was known in other ways too, depending upon which text you look at it. Here is a list of some of his names. The angel of the Lord, the Son of Man, Son of God, the second God, the name of God, the Logos, the word of wisdom. So, this guy's a theosophist, so that can't be trusted. If we go look at Wikipedia on Metatron, it says Metatron is an angel in Judaism mentioned 3 times in the Talmud. So Metatron's not in the Hebrew Bible. In a few brief passages in the Agada, in the mystical Kabbalistic text with rabbinic literature. The figure forms one of the traces for the presence of dualistic proclivities. In the otherwise monotheistic vision of both the Tanakh and the later Christian doctrine. The name Metatron is not mentioned in the Torah or the Bible, and how the name originated is a matter of debate. In Islamic tradition, he is known as Metatron, the angel of the veil. In folkloristic tradition, he is the highest of the angels and serves as the celestial scribe or recording angel. In Jewish Apocrypha and early Kabbalah, Metatron is the name that Enoch received after his transformation into an angel. So this is all Kabbalistic. It's got nothing to do with the Hebrew traditions or Bible. So going back to Kepler, and I'll just reread what I said about him. It says Kepler's early conception of the relationship between his mathematical and astronomical work and his confessional identity. It explores Kepler's theological metaphysics, which links God, man, and nature. So we've got the above, the below, via the idea of geometry. So that's Metatron. Kepler applied this metaphysics to contemporary debates about the nature of Christ, presence in the Eucharist. So the transformation, this is what they believed the Eucharist was, that, Aleister Crowley said that the Eucharist supernaturally changed into the body of the God, which then transferred the person partaking in the Eucharist into the God themselves. So in this chapter of God and his community, Kepler and the Catholic Church, it says this chapter considers Kepler's relationship with both specific Catholics and with the larger Catholic Church via an exploration of the theme of theological accommodation. It begins with Kepler's correspondence with Herwart von Hohenberg, in which Kepler portrayed astrology itself as a kind of divine accommodation. It then moves to Kepler's correspondence with Jesuit Paul Gulden, in which Kepler argued that he should be allowed to participate in the Mass in a Catholic church, with his particular theological objections duly noted. Finally, it considers Kepler's larger attitude to the Jesuit order and to Jesuit science in particular. So again, we have another Jesuit tie to Kepler, and this is Herwart von Hohenberg, was a Bavarian statesman and scholar and a patron and correspondent of Johannes Kepler. Herwart served as chancellor to the Duke of Bavaria and was regarded by the Bavarian aristocracy as an effective intermediary during the turbulent transition from reign of Duke Wilhelm V to that of his successor Maximilian I. Herwart's field as a scholar were astronomy, chronology, mathematics, and philology. His work in chronology was admired by Michael Maestlin, among others, and his work in mathematics contributed to the early formulation of logarithms by Just Bürgi and John Napier. He was also associated with Tycho Brahe, Johannes Praetorius, and Palacius Rosslin. Herwart often lent Kepler books that might otherwise have been unavailable to him and used his influence to help Kepler retain academic appointments despite his Protestantism. I doubt Kepler was a Protestant at all, but he was a pseudo-Protestant, as Herwart himself was an ardent Catholic and friend of Jesuits. His extant correspondence with Kepler covers a period from 1597 to 1611 and includes more than 90 letters. So I'd love to actually be able to read this book, but I don't have access to it. I think there's enough there in the description of the chapters to show that Kepler had a philosophy that was Kabbalistic. There's also some weird circumstances involving Kepler's mother. And it says here in 1615, Lutherus Einhorn, a local magistrate of Lauenburg, Germany, launched a series of witch trials, part of a witch-hunting hysteria then sweeping across Europe that claimed the lives of thousands of suspected sorcerers. In all, 15 local women were accused of witchcraft. On Einhorn's watch, 8 were executed. Among those caught up in the hysteria was the mother of one of history's greatest astronomers, Johannes Kepler. So in this article on Kepler, it says about his mother and his family. In a quote about his father here, it says, "My father Henrik was born in 1527 on the 19th of January. Saturn destroyed everything, producing a heinous, brusque, argumentative, and not least one destined to die a terrible death. The position of the stars multiplied his malice, plunged him into poverty, However, he found a rich wife. He was a trained artilleryman, had many enemies, and a marriage full of strife. False and vain, striving for honour and hope drove both of them, also wanderlust. Now, here we're showing that Kepler believed in astrology and, the position of the stars of your birth and their effect on your life. Says this follows by the list as his father's disappearance to serve as mercenary and his numerous business failures. Johannes closes with a hard judgment. Just as a window shutter gets damages, so my father injured himself on his return home. He treated my mother in the same way, and finally he went into exile and died. Henrik is followed by his younger brother Johannes, Uncle Siebold, who appears even worse than his father. His brother Siebold was born the 13th of November 1552, was a conjurer, Jesuit priest with the first and second ordination sorted in life because he was Catholic but pretended to be Lutheran. He died young of dropsy after many illnesses. He found a noble and rich wife, but with many children, he caught the Gallic disease, syphilis, was nefarious and hated his fellow citizens. So we've got Kepler's uncle who pretended to be a Lutheran but was actually a Catholic Jesuit incognito. It says, strangely, he ends with his account of the rapscallion with the following. He was educated in the humanities and a good companion. So he's calling his uncle Siebold a good companion. And now we arrive with his mother. My mother, Katharina Guldemann, was born the 8th of November 1547. This is then followed by discussion that the dates of her birth and her marriage didn't add up, and the contradictory claims made by her mother and her grandfather. Now comes Johannes' negative judgment over his mother. She is small, lean, black, with acerbic humour, argumentative, and has an unpleasant personality. Anyway, so I'm just wondering if this name Guldemann might be from the rabbi class. Born Katharina Guldemann in Stuttgart in 1546, she was raised by an aunt who was later burned at the stake for witchcraft. So her aunt was burnt for witchcraft. She married Heinrich Kepler, the son of a prominent merchant. So here's another red flag. Who served as mayor of the town of Weil. So there's 3 red flags. His father is a merchant. His brother is a Jesuit, and his father seems to hold a prominent position in the community as a mayor. They had 4 children, one of whom was Johannes. It was not a happy marriage. The family fortune was in decline, exacerbated by Heinrich's volatile temper and heavy drinking. Kepler describes him as a man, vicious, inflexible, and doomed to a bad end. Katharina's temperament wasn't much better. One historical account describes her as an evil-tempered virago, and Kepler wrote that she was small, thin, swarthy, gossiping, and quarrelsome, of a bad disposition. Heinrich brought a small tavern with what was left of his inherited wealth, and when that failed, he abandoned his family entirely, enlisting in the Austrian army for the war against the Turks. By then, Kepler had completed his studies at University of Tubingen. It says some historians have speculated that Kepler may have even contributed to the rumours by virtue of an allegory he wrote called Somnium, the Dream, arguably the earliest work of science fiction, given its description of a trip to the moon and speculation on what astronomy would be like if practiced on another planet. The characters included a fictional wise woman named Felixhild, who sells magic charms and communes with a demon in the moon. A strong resemblance to Katharina. The book wasn't published officially until 1634, long after Katharina's trial, but a footnote Kepler added to the main text suggests a copy of the manuscript in progress found its way to Tubingen around 1611, and he believed it had fueled suspicion of sorcery. It says, quote, "You would think a spark had fallen on dry wood," he wrote. "My words had been taken up by dark minds which suspect everything else of being dark." Regardless of whether Kepler was correct in his assessment, the rumours about his mother's intensified in 1615. A local woman named Ursula Reingold, who had also fallen out with Kepler's brother Christoph, claimed that Katrina had poisoned her with a potion. After Einhorn, a cousin of Reingold's, as well as magistrate attempt to force a confession at sword point while drunk. The fiery Katharina countered by suing her accuser for slander. So it says in the end, Judicial College at University of Tubingen ruled that there was insufficient evidence on either side rather than order her subjected to torture to induce a confession or release her outright. The college decided she should be shown the instruments of torture: hot irons, pincers, long needles, the rack, and a gallows used for drawing and quartering, with a graphic description of how each implement would be used. This was a practice known as territio verbalis, meant to frighten the accused into a confession. Katharina was made of sterner stuff. She stubbornly refused to confess, declaring, "Do with me what you want. Even if you were to pull one vein after another out of my body, I would have nothing to admit." Then she recited a pater noster on her knees in a savvy display of piety. So ultimately, Kepler's defense was a success. Katharina was acquitted and released in October 1621 by order of the Duke of Württemberg, who ruled that her refusal of confession proved her innocence. An unrepentant Katharina promptly filed another lawsuit insisting Rheingold should cover the costs associated with her trial as recompense for making a false accusation. The suit never went to trial. Katharina died the following year. So there's some pretty suspect history to Kepler. Albert Schweitzer, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German Lutheran pastor. So you'll see with this school that, we've got all these Protestant reformer type people, theologian and anti-Nazi dissident, and key founding member of the Confessing Church. His writings on Christianity's role in the secular world have become widely influential, and his book, The Cost of Discipline, is described as a modern classic. Now, what's interesting with this university is it has a lot of revolutionary Christian beliefs coming out of it, and it says that they're Protestant beliefs, but we see down here that there's a lot of Roman Catholic association with this school, and I'm just wondering if this is a Jesuit school associated with the Jesuit Counter-Reformation. Kurt George Kiesinger. Now I'm just wondering if this guy is maybe a relation of Kissinger. It's just a slightly different spelling. There's an E instead of a double S. He was a German politician who served as the Chancellor of the West Germany from the 1st of December 66 to October 69. And he was chairman of the Christian Democratic Union. Now let's have a look at the Christian Democratic Union. So the Christian Democratic Union of Germany is a Christian democratic and liberal conservative political party in Germany. It is the major catch-all party of the center-right in German politics. So this particular political party seems to have a lot to do with this university. So ironically, the Hegelian philosophy comes out of this university, and we have this Hegelian style politics with right and left. Founded in 1945 as an interdenominational Christian party, the CDU effectively succeeded the pre-war Catholic Centre Party. So it succeeded the Catholic Party. So, we're talking a Protestant university, but we've got all of these people coming out of here. And this particular political party is interdenominational, with many former members joining the party, including the first leader, Konrad Adenauer. The party also included politicians of other backgrounds, including liberals and conservatives. As a result, the party claimed to represent Christian social, liberal, and conservative elements. The CDU is a generally pro-European in outlook. So Germany's 3 longest-serving post-war chancellors have all come from the CDU, more specifically Helmut Kohl, Angela Merkel, and Konrad Adenauer. So that's kind of interesting that this particular party has this Kissinger. Is he related to Henry Kissinger with a slight variation in his name? Well, it's quite possible. Friedrich Hölderlin, German poet. Ferdinand I of Romania was the king of Romania from 1914 to 1927. Fritz Bauer. So here's another Bauer associated with this school. Fritz Bauer was a German Jewish judge and prosecutor. He was instrumental in the post-war capture of former Holocaust planner Adolf Eichmann and played an essential role in beginning the Frankfurt Auschwitz trials. And we have Mary L. Trump. Mary Lee Trump is an American psychologist and author, a niece of former President Donald Trump. She has been critical of him as well as the rest of the Trump family. Her 2020 book about him and family, Too Much and Never Enough, sold nearly 1 million copies on the day of its release. But we know, Mary, that you've been taught Hegelian dialectics at this particular university, so we don't believe a word you've said. Horst Kohler, German politician from the Christian Democratic Party, seems to be, you have to be an alumni of this university to be in the Christian Democratic Party. Manfred Rommel, and I wonder if he's related to the Nazi Rommel. Erwin Rommel was a German field marshal during World War II, popularly known as the Desert Fox. And Rommel is a politician belonging to the Christian Democratic Union, the CDU. Alois Alzheimer, a German physicist and neuropathologist. Obviously, that's where Alzheimer's disease may have been named after him. Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling, German philosopher, German diplomat. Klaus Kleber, German journalist. Philip Melanchthon, German Lutheran reformer. Collaborated with Martin Luther, the first systematic theologian of the Protestant Reformation, intellectual leader of the Lutheran Reformation, and influential designer of educational systems. He stands next to Luther and John Calvin as reformer, theologian, and molder of Protestantism. So this guy, Philip Melanchthon, deserves a look into because he is a Lutheran reformer. He was born Philip Schwarzerd, was a German Lutheran reformer, collaborated with Martin Luther, the first systematic theologian of the Protestant Reformation, intellectual leader of the Lutheran Reformation, and influential designer of educational systems. He stands next to Luther and John Calvin as a reformer, theologian, and shaper of Protestantism. Now, I don't know if this guy's a good guy or not. Just because he was part of the Protestant Reformation doesn't mean that he was good. I'm not saying he was bad either, but, you know, I know later in life Luther wrote the book The Jews and Their Lies, and, you know, I think he had initially been friends with the Jews or thought they were his allies, but later discovered that they weren't. From what I understood, he thought that he could convert the Jews to Christianity, and then later he discovered what was in the Talmud and what they actually believed from their writings in the Talmud. Now, I'm not saying Luther was a perfect person either. I haven't looked too deeply into him. He could have been one of these Hegelian deceivers too, but I don't think the Protestant Reformation started out as their plan to deceive people. You know, the printing and reading of the Bible was a positive thing for people, but also I think that this Counter-Reformation saw an opportunity to destroy the fundamental Christian belief of Western people, and they needed to turn it to their advantage because people were starting to learn the truth that was actually in the Bible written by the apostles. Now I'm going to go into the early life of Philip. He was born Philip Schwarzerd on the 16th of February 1497 at Bretten, where his father George Schwarzerd was armourer to Philip Count Palatine of the Rhine. His mother was Barbara Reuter. So I just want to know, was she related to this particular Reuter, Paul Reuter? So he was born, Paul Julius Reuter, born Israel Beer Josaphat in 1816, later ennobled as Freya von Reuter. Baron von Reuter was a German-born British entrepreneur who was a pioneer of telegraphy and news reporting. He was a reporter, media owner, and the founder of Reuters News Agency, which became part of the Thomson Reuters conglomerate in 2008. So basically, I've heard that Rothschilds own Reuters, and when we go to Google again, we've got all the fact checkers saying false. There is no evidence the Rothschild family owns Reuters. So Reuters is owned by the Thomas Corporation. Fact check. No, the Rothschild family does not own Reuters. And I kind of beg to differ on that because Paul Israel Beer. Now we know that Beer is another name for Bauer. So I dare say that he is just in the line of the Rothschild family, the Bauer family. He was Israel Bayer, Baer, in his Jenny page. Son of Rabbi Samuel Levi Josephat and Betty Josephat. Husband of Fanny Marie Reuter von Magnus. So in the Jewish Encyclopedia, Reuter Paul Julius Freyer von, originally Israel Ber Jehoshaphat, German banker, bookseller, news entrepreneur, and founder of the Reuters Limited news agency, born in Kassel, Germany, as the third son of provisional Rabbi Samuel Levi Jehoshaphat. The 13-year-old Israel Beer was sent to his uncle in Gothenburg, where he was trained in a local banking house at Göttingen University. He made the acquaintance of famous mathematician and astronomer Carl Friedrich Gauss, who was experimenting in electrotelegraphy. In 1845, after having settled in Berlin, he converted to Protestantism. Sure he did. Assumed the name of Paul Julius Reuter and married Ida, the daughter of Friedrich Martin Freyer von Magnus, a Berlin banker. I'm sure she was a Protestant as well. In 1847, together with Joseph Stargard, he took over a bookshop and publishing business, Stargard and Reuter, in Berlin. Assisted by his father-in-law's capital, after being charged with spreading democratic pamphlets in 1848, he managed to escape to Paris. There, a successor to Bernhard Wolff, Reuter worked as a translator for the established French news agency Havas, founded by Charles Louis Havas in 1835. So can we point him to the Rothschild family? Well, from the information I have here online, no. Is his surname a Rothschild surname? Yes. Got Rothschild archives. In 1850, Paul Julius Reuter approached the Rothschilds in London, seeking them as a client for a new service he was developing to speed information across Europe with the latest technology. Within months, Reuter had moved to London and set up in offices only 2 minutes from St. Swithin's Lane. N.M. Rothschild and Sons became early and effective patrons of Reuters telegraph, using it to send coded messages to and from their agents and counterparties around the world. A new generation and definition of speed had arrived. So we've got him collaborating with the Rothschilds. They're all from rabbinical families with similar backgrounds in their surname. And if we have a look at this Reuters logo, we've got St. George with the spear ready to slay the dragon. We've got the Rothschild bankers of London who display the dragon with the St. George flag. So, you know, their symbology and logos have the same imagery in them. If we go back to the Jewish Virtual Library, we've got Melanchthon Schwarzerd Philipp, German reformer and theologian born at Bretten in Baden, was a great-nephew of the Hebraist Christian Kabbalist Johann Reuchlin, who taught him Hebrew and supervised his education at Pforzheim in 1518. At the age of 21, Melanchthon was appointed professor of Greek at Wittenberg, but within a year he had sided with Martin Luther in a struggle with Rome, thus alienating Reuchlin, who later disinherited him. Now I'm wondering if, you know, he sided with Martin Luther as a way to create this counter-Reformation or to be part of the Reformation, to create this Jewish emancipation. It's highly likely that this guy is Jewish. I mean, he has this uncle who is a Kabbalist and he's a Hebraist. He's teaching him Hebrew. I mean, what German in those times would have known how to teach Hebrew or would have been into the Kabbalah? It's pretty random. Melanchthon was Luther's principal assistant in translating the Old Testament into German. Widely respected as a humanist and theologian, he favored study of the Kabbalah, but condemned its later accretations. One of his addresses on the importance of Hebrew, De Studio Lingua Hebraeae, appeared in 1549. Although Melanchthon was influenced by Luther's anti-Semitism, he avoided its crude excess. In 1539 at Frankfurt Religious Assembly, publicly denounced the blood libel that had resulted in martyrdom of 38 Brandenburg Jews in 1510. So I personally think that, reading between the lines here, this blood libel situation was becoming a bit of a problem for the Jewish community of Europe, and that they had to do a little bit of damage control here as far as hiding their Talmud and Kabbalistic backgrounds. So I'm going to come back to Philip Melanchthon in the next video. There's so much more about this man that needs to be said. Paul Tillich, Lutheran Protestant theologian. Thomas Oppermann, German politician. Social Democratic Party. Boris Palmer, German politician for the Green Party. He's the mayor of Tubingen since January 2007, member of the Baden-Württemberg Landtag, State Parliament of Stuttgart. He has a daughter from his relationship with Francesca Brandner. And if we have a look at her, Franziska Katrina Brandner is a German politician of the Green Party who has been serving as a member of the German Parliament since 2013 and gathering her first international experience working at the office of the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Tel Aviv. Okay, red flag. And Washington, D.C. So I don't know. I don't want to be too judgmental, but does this guy look like Happy Gilmore to you? I think there's a bit of genetic similarities here. Boris Palmer, Adam Sandler, I'm just saying. William Ramsay, Scottish chemist and discovered the noble gases and received Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1904. Gunther Oettinger, a German lawyer, politician from the Christian Democratic Union again. Wilhelm Hoff, poet and novelist. Heiner Giebler, German politician with the Christian Democratic Union. So there's a lot of association with this university again, with this school. Franz Brentano, German philosopher and former Catholic priest. Okay, there's a bit of Catholic association with this school. Due to the definition of papal infallibility in matters of faith, whose work strongly influenced not only students Edmund Husserl, Sigmund Freud, Thomas Masaryk, Rudolf Steiner, all these tribe members. So yeah, possibly a Jesuit. Kind of looks like one. Rita Sussmuth, German politician of the Christian Democratic Union. Ernst Albrecht, politician of the Christian Democratic Union. Rudolf Bultmann. I'm wondering, Germans, are you getting handed your politicians from this university? Rudolf Bultmann, German Lutheran theologian and professor of the New Testament. So this university has a lot to do with the liberalization of Christianity, and I'll show that later. Romano Guardini was a German Catholic priest, author, and academic. He was one of the most important figures in Catholic intellectual life in the 20th century. He was born in Verona, Italy. Guardini's books were often powerful studies of traditional themes in light of present-day challenges of examinations of current problems as approached from the Christian and especially Catholic tradition. He was able to enter into the worldview of those such as Socrates, Plato, Augustine, Dante, Pascal, Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky, and Nietzsche, and make sense of them for modern readers. A philosopher, he founded no school, but his intellectual disciplines could in some sense be paid to include Joseph Piper, Luigi Pisani, Felix Messerschmidt, Heinrich Getzny, Rudolf Schwartz, Jean Gerbser, Joseph Ratzinger, later Pope Benedict, George Mario Bergoglio, later Pope Francis. So he influenced Pope Francis. Wow, okay. So both of these creepy popes. In 1980, Bergoglio began work on a doctoral dissertation on Guarini, though he never completed it. Pope Francis cited Guarini's The End of the Modern World 8 times in 2015. Encyclical Laudato Si, more often than any other modern thinker who was not Pope. I'm wondering if he was a Jesuit. Seeing Pope Francis is a Jesuit. Wilhelm Schickard, a German professor of Hebrew and astronomy, who became famous in the second part of the 20th century after Franz Hammer, a biographer along with Max Caspar and Johannes Kepler, claimed that the drawings of the calculating clock predicting the public release of Pascal's calculator by 20 years had been discovered in 2 unknown letters written by Schickard to Johannes Kepler in 1623 to 1624. Karl Peters was a German colonial ruler, explorer, politician, and author, and major promoter of the establishment of the German colony of East Africa, part of the modern Republic of Tanzania, a proponent of social Darwinism and the Volkisch philosophy. His attitude towards the indigenous population made him one of the most controversial colonizers even during his lifetime. David Strauss, German Protestant theologian and writer who influenced Christian Europe with the portrayal of his historical Jesus, whose divine nature he denied. And a lot of people that are so-called Christians that come out of this university deny the divine nature of Jesus, just like Hegel did. Walter Kaspar is a German Roman Catholic cardinal. Karl I of Württemberg, royalty. Oli Nadal is a Lama providing Mahamudra teaching in the Karma Kagyu school of Tibetan Buddhism. So more radical philosophy and religion coming out of this university. Julius von Meyer, so Meyer, a Rothschild name, was a German physician, chemist, and physicist, and one of the founders of thermodynamics. Was he a Rothschild? Possibly, who knows. Angie Jacqueline, Archbishop of Uppsala and Primate of the Church of Sweden. Sebastian Munster. Now, Munsters possibly can be a Jewish surname. German cartographer, cosmographer, and Christian Hebraist scholar. Ingmar Malte-Hoher is a German biologist. He's pioneered vaccinology research concerning the use of RNA and is a founder of the German biotechnology company CureVac. He created the initial technology used in RNA vaccines and has reportedly been nominated for a Nobel Prize. It says Bill Gates, whose foundation invested in CureVac, rated Hoher's pioneering work as groundbreaking in an interview with German newspaper Handelsblatt. The first mRNA vaccine developed by Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna in 2020 are the product of the multitude of ideas and discoveries by German scientist Ingmar Hoher, who spent 20 years experimenting with messenger RNA. Eugen Gertzmeyer, evangelical theologian. Johannes Valentius André, German theologian who claimed to be the author of an ancient text known as the Chemische Hochzeits Christiani Rosenkreuz Anno 1459. This became one of the 3 founding works of Rosicrucianism, which was both a legend and a fashionable cultural phenomenon across Europe in this period. The founder of Rosicrucianism went to this university. Kwai Guana, can't say that, was a politician and diplomat for the People's Republic of China and played an important role in the talks with the United States and the opening of China and drafting of the Shanghai Communique. Miroslav Volf is a Croatian Protestant theologian and public intellectual. So, these people are high in all these churches. Christian Friedrich Schonbein, German-Swiss chemist, known for inventing the fuel cell. Joachim Kaiser, German music, literature, theatre, and Bernhard Orbrach, German Jewish poet and author. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting connections to this university, and I actually believe they may be Jesuit. So we have this guy here, PD Dr. Gero Bauer, so another Bauer for the University of Tubingen, and he is managing director. He's not very old. How did a guy that seems pretty young become a managing director of such a big university? Research interests: Victorianism, modernism, 21st century, Anglophone literature, film and series, gender and queer studies, eroticism, new materialism, post-decolonist studies, literary and cultural history. So he's just a woke Marxist. So there's a lot of Bowers associated with this university. And we can see how he got his job as the director of the university. It's more than likely nepotism and his woke attitude that is promoted to the top of every aspect of Western society today. So I'm going to finish this video here. I just wanted to give a bit of insight into who went to this university and what their background and interests were and how they changed or challenged the worldview of Europe and Western culture. Thanks for listening, and more to come in the next video.